Of our Thursday Parashat Shavua class. Today we are studying Parashat Re'eh, as is this week's parasha, is also Rosh Hodesh Elul. And Parashat Re'eh is always read either on the Shabbat where we bless the upcoming month of Elul, or on Rosh Hodesh Elul itself, as in this year. So I'd like to explore today, Bezrat Hashem, with your permission, the association between the two, between Parashat Re'eh and Hodesh Elul. The Torah begins in the parasha, Re'eh Anochi noten lifnechem hayom beracha uklala. See, I place before you today a beracha and a kelala, a blessing and a curse. Et beracha, what is the blessing? Asher tishmeu el mitzvot Adonai Elohechem, that you will listen to the mitzvot of Hashem, your God. Asher anochi metzavetchem hayom, that I'm commanding you today. Ve'akelala, and the curse. Im lo tishmeu el mitzvot Adonai Elohechem, if you do not listen to the mitzvot of Hashem your God, v'sartem min haderech, and you veer from the path, asher anochi metzaveh etchem hayom, that I command you today, lalechet acharei Elohim acharim asher lo yadatem, to follow other gods that you did not know. One of the Chachamim explained that Hakadosh Baruch Hu actually alludes to Chodesh Elul in these Pesukim. He gave us a month of Elul prior to Rosh Hashanah, affording us a last-minute opportunity to perform teshuvah and make amends for all the misdeeds that we've done, our past years' averot and transgressions. And in the merit of this teshuvah, we will deserve a ketivah v'chatimah tova on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur. We will be inscribed for a good and blessed year. How is this alluded to? The word hayom, the day, Re'eh Anochi noten lifnechem hayom, is an allusion to Rosh Hashanah. The Zohar writes, Vayhi hayom, da Rosh Hashanah. This is Rosh Hashanah. So when it says, Re'eh Anochi noten lifnechem hayom beracha uklala, behold, I am giving you today, or see, I'm giving you in front of you today a beracha uklala, know that I'm providing for you an opportunity before the day of Rosh Hashanah, to determine whether or not it will bring you a beracha or chas v'shalom, an opposite to kelala. Et beracha asher tishmeu el mitzvot Adonai Elohechem. The beracha is the teshuvah that you can perform during the month of Elul to make amends for all of Hashem's mitzvot that you failed to perform properly. Ve'akelala, and what is a curse? Im lo tishmeu el mitzvot Adonai Elohechem. And the kelala, chas v'shalom, God help us, if you fail to perform the mitzvot properly, that's what it will give you. You will not be sealed in the book of good and life for the next year as a result of you failing to do what you needed to do. And he continues to explain et beracha shetishmeu as an allusion to the minhag of blowing the shofar during the month of Elul, as many of us do during the recital of Selichot. Some people do it following Shacharit. The reason for doing this is to arouse Bnei Israel to perform teshuvah. The Tur describes the minhag, and he says, "Hitkinu chachamenu zichronam livracha sheyu tokein berosh chodesh Elul bechol shana v'shana bechol hachodesh." That not only is it just on the month, the Rosh Chodesh Elul, but even the entire month, kedei le'azir Israel sheyasu teshuvah, in order to warn Bnei Israel to perform teshuvah. And he quotes a pasuk in Amos, "Imitaka shofar ba'ir ve'am lo yecheradu." Is a shofar ever sounded in the city and the people do not tremble? So that's the message that is conveyed by the pasuk. Et beracha shetishmeu el mitzvot Adonai Elohechem asher anochi mitzavecha hayom. If you perform this mitzvah that Hakadosh Baruch Hu commanded you to perform on Rosh Hashanah, specifically the sounding of the shofar, the blowing of the shofar prior to Rosh Hashanah. If you do it before Rosh Hashanah during the month of Elul to arouse teshuvah and have a clean slate by the end of the year, then you will be deserving of a good and blessed year on Rosh Hashanah. The numerical value, believe it or not, the gematria of the entire pasuk, Re'eh Anochi noten lifnechem hayom beracha uklala, is exactly equal to the words Tik'u b'Hodesh shofar, the words in Tehillim that we recite on Rosh Hashanah. We also say it on the Yom Chamishi. It is the Psalm of Thursday. Blow the shofar of the new moon. So in the merit of hearing the shofar during the month of Elul, we will succeed in bestowing beracha upon the heads of Bnei Israel, and as well, unfortunately, kelala upon the heads of upon those that don't perform the mitzvot. But we hope that kelala gets laid down on the heads of our enemies that wish to destroy us, and that is what our Chachamim say in connection between Re'eh Anochi and Hodesh Elul. There's actually another allusion. Re'eh Anochi lifnechem, noten lifnechem hayom. The Megaleh Amukot in Parashat Va'etchanan writes in relation to Balak's remark to Bilam. Balak said, "Ve'ata lecha na'ara li et ha'am hazeh." Please come and impose a curse upon the people for me. Balak, of course, instructed Bilam to curse Bnei Israel on his behalf. And with these words, he actually wished to annul the power of Teshuvah, of Elul and Rosh Hashanah. The word ara, which means to curse, can be interpreted as an abbreviation for Elul and Rosh Hashanah. Aleph Reish Hey, Elul, Rosh Hashanah. So one of the reasons why we open this week's parasha with the word Re'eh is also Elul, Rosh Hashanah, because this alludes to the fact that the month of Elul is a preparation for Rosh Hashanah, and we are combating that idea of curse that Balak wished to impose upon us with the concept of doing the proper mitzvot during these times, as we will see and talk about as the shiur goes on. There is another association that I want to expand with in the name of Rav Pinchas Friedman, may he live and be well, in that we have a connection between the month of Elul and our way of life and the performance of the mitzvot. He explains that Bnei Israel had a very, very lofty intent during the time of Matan Torah, when they declared Na'aseh v'nishma, the two famous words, we will listen and we will do and we will listen. Na'aseh v'nishma. The Torah tells us, "Vayomeru kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh v'nishma." Everything that Hashem said, we will do and we will obey. Why was this statement considered so admirable? What was so special about this statement? So he quotes the Sefer Yismach Moshe in Parashat Terumah, and he says that a Jew's goal is to be constantly connected to Hashem and His Torah, even when he is engaged in matters that pertain to Olam Hazeh. Even when he's eating, he's drinking, he's enjoying, he's on vacation, he still always has to be connected to Hashem and the Torah. And the Gemara teaches in Masechet Megillah regarding the obligatory Torah reading that it's actually prohibited for two people to read the Torah simultaneously. And the reason why two people cannot read the Torah at the same time for other people, Ditrei kala lo mishtam'ei, because two voices are not discernible. So basically, you can't figure out who is which voice is who, because there's two voices going at the same time. When a person is burdened and occupied with earthly concerns, then how is it possible to hear the voice of Hashem? It's impossible. We have this principle of two voices cannot be discerned simultaneously. So he provides a solution from the same Gemara. The same Gemara says, "Ubahalelu b'Megillah afilu asara korin." If 10 people were to come together and choir the recital of the Megillah or the recital of Hallel, korin, you fulfill the mitzvah. You're allowed to hear 10 people recite the Megillah at once, but you're not allowed to hear 2 or more people recite the Torah. What's the difference? My ta'ama. Why is Megillah okay to have more people recite it at the same time? Kevan de chaviva bi'aved datayu v'shamei. Because since it's a precious mitzvah, it's something dear to us, the listeners are connected to hear it and focus more and concentrate more and discern the separate voices that are going on. So if a person cherishes the Torah enough, he can discern the voice of Hashem even when he's occupied in earthly matters. And that's a deeper significance of when Bnei Israel said, Kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh v'nishma, that the declaration of na'aseh is related to their occupation of earthly matters, I'm eating and I'm drinking. And the declaration of nishma conveyed their intent that I'm still paying attention to the voice of Hashem in my mind, even when I'm occupied in earthly matters, dvarim ba'olam hazeh. Why? Because I have a special love for the Torah. We can elaborate based on the pasuk that prefaces the giving of the Torah in Parashat Yitro. The pasuk says, "B'chodesh hashelishi letzet bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, bayom hazeh ba'u midbar Sinai." In the 3rd month from the exodus of Bnei Yisrael from Mitzrayim, on this day they arrived in Midbar Sinai. So Rashi says, why does it have to say Bayom Hazeh, on this day? So Rashi says it only needs to say on the reason is because the words of Torah should be new to you as if it was given to you on this day. It's our obligation, says Rashi, that any chidush, any novelty of the Torah needs to be felt on a daily basis as if we had just received it. In fact, we say every day in Kiryat Shema, Rashi also says that the Torah should not be considered in your eyes like a very old document or an old edict which a person does not attach any importance to, but rather it's something that is it should be considered something that's new to you, towards where everybody runs to because it's so fresh and opportunistic that you want to come and you want to lay claim on it and grab hold of this new document called the Torah. So it's a very fantastic concept here. But how is it possible to experience the novelty of the Torah on a daily basis? The Torah tells us in Parashat Vayetchanan, "Et hadevarim ha'ele diber Adonai kol ke'alchem bahar mitoch ha'anan ha'esh ha'anan ha'arafel kol gadol velo yasaf." These words that Hashem spoke to your entire congregation on the mountain, from the midst of the fire, the cloud and the fog, and the powerful voice that was never ending. Rashi interprets, what does it mean? Kol gadol velo yasaf, kol rav velo pasak. He says it's a powerful voice that does not stop. He quotes a Targum. And we see from here that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's voice that Bnei Yisrael heard at the time of Matan Torah is eternal. It's something that does not cease even for a single moment. And it's our job to focus on that voice and hear it at all times. So this is what, in fact, the Turei Zahav, the Taz, writes in Shulchan Aruch on why is it that when we bless the Torah, when we go up to the Torah, or we bless the Birkot Torah in the morning in the Birkot HaShachar, the text of the bracha is Baruch Atah Hashem Noten HaTorah. But it should be Natan HaTorah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us the Torah so many millennia ago. Why do we say Noten HaTorah? The idea is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu continues to give us the Torah. It's something that is done with us every single day. We occupy ourselves with it. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu constantly giving us new explanations and new chidushim for us to learn. We can understand this idea and elaborate based on what we were saying. This kol gadol velo yasaf. It's a powerful voice that doesn't stop. It continues to push through the space of the universe for us to grab hold of. And anybody who toils in the study of Torah is privileged to receive this voice of Matan Torah on the day that it was given. And that's why the Chachamim instituted Noten HaTorah in the present tense, because we receive the Torah anew on a daily basis. So that's how it's possible for us to sense the novelty of the Torah every day as if it was given today. After all, the Torah is indeed given on a daily basis from that Kol Gadol Velo Yasaf, that Kol Rav Velo Pasak, the Rashi explains, a power everlasting voice. Chachamim explain that they once witnessed the Baal Shem Tov, who would study with his holy students, that flames of fire would surround them, and heavenly malachim would gather around when they were studying. And they would hear thunder and lightning, and the words Anochi Adonai Elohecha that was uttered by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that was going on during the moments that Baal Shem Tov was studying Torah with his students. You hear these stories and you can't understand, you can't help but apply them to the ideas that we just learned. When a person is immersed in earthly activities and he is overwhelmed by the sounds of Olam Hazeh, it's difficult for a person to be inspired. It's difficult for a person to recognize the voice of Hashem, that same voice that proclaimed Anochi Hashem Elokecha on the time of Matan Torah. Today, kala lo mishtame, like the Gemara says in Masechet Megillah that we quoted. When two voices are going on at the same time, how can I pay attention to my voice on this world doing mundane things and listen to the voice of HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the same time? But if the Torah is dear to you, if you are the Baal Shem Tov and his students, where everything in life for you is something that is connected to Torah, then all your earthly endeavors are just a means to better serve Hashem. Then you remain attuned to the voice of Hashem. And that was a message delivered by Bnei Israel, when they said, Kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh v'nishma, even when we are engaged in the performance of earthly material tasks, we will continue to hear that eternal voice of Hashem, that voice of Hashem from Matan Torah, because the Torah is dear to us. One of the ideas that one of the places in the Torah where we see this concept of voice is Yaakov Avinu and Esav Harasha when receiving the beracha from their father Esav, when they're from their father Yitzchak. The Torah says, "Vayigash Yaakov el Yitzchak aviv vaymusheu." Yaakov approached his father Yitzchak and he felt him. Vayomer Hakol Kol Yaakov dayadayim de Esav. The voice is Yaakov's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esav. There's a redundancy here in Yitzchak's remarks. The word voice is written twice. Hakol Kol Yaakov, and as well the word hand is written twice. Vayadayim yede Esav. So why is this the case? First of all, what possessed Yitzchak to consider bestowing the brachot upon Esav rather upon Yaakov? Yaakov, of course, is Yaakov Ishtam Yosef Ohalim. A lot of answers to this question. Rashi explains that this refers, of course, Yaakov Ishtam Yosef Ohalim. Yaakov was sitting and studying Torah in the tent. So he learned the Torah from Yeshiva Shem Ba'eved. So it could be that that Yitzchak rather, he feared that if Yaakov and his children would occupy themselves with earthly matters, that they would become so engrossed in those earthly matters that they would fail to hear the constant voice of Hashem. But the Rivka, Yaakov's mother, was well aware of who her son was. She was well aware of her son's extreme kedusha. She knew that he was capable of hearing Hashem's voice even when occupied in earthly matters. So therefore, she instructed Yaakov to don Esav's clothing and receive the brachot pertaining to Olam Hazeh, to this world, from Yitzchak. So when Yitzchak touches Yaakov, the pillar of Torah, he is inspired by Ruach HaKodesh to remark, Hakol Kol Yaakov, you are indeed capable of discerning and distinguishing between the two voices. Because the Torah is so dear to you, you are able to separate the voice of Hashem even though you are occupied with worldly matters. And because of that, Vayadayim Yedei Esav, you're also going to receive the brachot, Esav's brachot, and engage in matters of Olam Hazeh using your two hands, your two types of functions implied by the repetition of the words of hands. First, you're going to use your hands for the actual performance of the mitzvah. That's one mention of the word yad. And then you're going to use your hands to perform earthly tasks, to support yourself, all while at the same time you recognize and are cognizant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's voice that is reverberating throughout the world. And this actually fits nicely with one of the pesukim in Shir HaShirim that we recite every Friday night. Hashmi'ini et kolech ki kolech arev. Let me hear your voice, Hashem says, for your voice is sweet. The gematria of the word arev, which means sweet or pleasing, is twice the gematria of the word kol, which means voice. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling a Jew that he loves to hear our voice, specifically when we are occupied in mundane and earthly matters. Then he explains, Ki kolech arev, because the Torah is so dear to you, you are able to hear the voice even while you're making the sounds of Olam Hazeh. As a result, you hear these two voices, 2 times kol, which is arev, and that's pleasing to me, says HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There was a story brought down in the Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Tzadi Chet Amud Aleph, where Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi came across and met Mashiach. And he asked Mashiach the main question, Ematai ka'ate mar? Mashiach, when are you coming? And Mashiach replied, Hayom, I'm coming today. So Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was excited. He waited till the end of the day, and guess what? He didn't come. So when he failed to arrive, he went to Eliyahu Navi, and he said, Eliyahu, what's going on? Mashiach told me he's coming today. So Eliyahu Navi explained, what did he mean when he said today? When he said today, it meant Hayom im bekolot tishma'u. Today, if you hear his voice. He will come today if you hear his voice. So Mashiach was saying, I can only come today if the condition of Hayom im bekolot tishma'u was met. That when you are engaged in mundane and earthly matters, you continue to hear and heed the voice of Hashem, of Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Hayom im bekolot tishma. When you hear His voice, the voice of Hashem, while you do your everyday things, that's when I'm ready to come. And that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Am Yisrael prior to Matan Torah, or that's how He was revealing Himself. Kol gadol velo yasaf. HaKadosh Baruch Hu's sounding of His voice of Matan Torah without ceasing. The Sefer Arugot HaBosem writes that he heard from the great esteemed Chacham of Yoshua of Belz, who also cites a Baal Shem Tov. And he says something very amazing. Say a person wishes to fulfill a particular mitzvah, but the Yetzer Hara is preventing him from doing so. Or let's say he's confronted with a sin, a mitzvah lo ta'aseh, and he's being swayed by the Yetzer Hara to transgress that avera. So what does the Baal Shem Tov say to do as a segula to protect himself from the Yetzer Hara? Simple. Repeat and recite the words in the Torah of that mitzvah aseh of lo ta'aseh. So for example, if a person has an urge to go kill somebody, and he's literally he wants to go and murder someone, he should say the words lo tirtzach. Say lo tirtzach, that's the commandment not to murder. And those words, say lo tirtzach, you instantly kill the Yetzer Hara that's trying to entice you to kill someone. If you're trying to do chesed for your parents and you're trying to honor them, you need to go to their house, and but there's things in the way preventing you from doing so. There's a Yetzer Hara that is hindering your progress towards that mitzvah. Recite Kaber et avicha v'etimecha, and that will get rid of the Yetzer Hara. So that's the segula suggested by the Baal Shem Tov. Kach HaKadosh Baruch Hu amar lahem leIsrael. Hashem said to Israel, Beni, barati Yetzer Hara ubarati lo Torah tavlin. My children, my son, I've created Yetzer Hara, but I also created the Torah as its antidote. V'matem oskim b'Torah en atem nimsarim biyado. If you engage in Torah study, you are not going to be delivered into its hand. The Torah acts as a segula for overcoming the Yetzer Hara. So therefore, if a person preemptively recites a mitzvah like it appears in the Torah, he's able to perform the mitzvah or avoid the avera without meddling of the Yetzer Hara. There's another alternative explanation to what the Baal Shem Tov suggests over here, based on the famous Kabbalist, the Ramami Pano. He teaches us that all the mitzvot in the Torah, every single one, whether they're mitzvot aseh, positive commandments, or mitzvot lo ta'aseh, negative commandments, they are comprised of two essential elements. On one hand, they are comprised of Hashem's command obligating us to perform the mitzvah, to respect our parents, or not to murder, as we gave examples. On the other hand, they also constitute a promise and a guarantee that we'll be able to perform that mitzvah without any hindrance. So, for example, there is a mitzvah in Sefer Shemot, Ba'erev tochelu matzot. Ba'erev tochelu matzot. In the evening, on the night of Pesach, you shall eat matzot. On the one hand, this is a physical commandment that we have an obligation to eat matzah on the night of Pesach. But on the other hand, it's also an assurance that if we wish to observe this mitzvah, we are promised that we are going to do so without any hindrance. Lo tochelu kol nevela. There's a negative commandment not to eat any dead carcass of an animal. So on the one hand, this is an admonition not to eat unslaughtered meat. And on the other hand, it's also an assurance that if a person chooses to observe Hashem's commandments, he will be assured that he's not going to consume any unslaughtered meat. So we actually have a big chidush over here of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's statement to Bnei Israel. Beni, barati Yetzer Hara barati Torah tavlin. My son, I created the Yetzer Hara, but I also created the Torah as its antidote. The Torah, which was presented as a command and the promise, is the antidote created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to counteract the Yetzer Hara. This is also what the Baal Shem Tov tried to teach us, that the reciting the mitzvah, the words in the Torah which speak about the mitzvah, is a segula which enables a person to fulfill the mitzvah without any interference. By reciting the words of the mitzvah, he activates that promise of God that is inherent in the mitzvah, that he will be able to fulfill the mitzvah. And now we put it all together. HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose to have his kol gadol velo yasaf, his powerful voice of Matan Torah, continue to reverberate throughout the world without ceasing. And these dibrot were given to us by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They are not just commands that we must observe, but they also include His promise that we're able to fulfill the mitzvot. So when we hear these mitzvot every single day, we are being assisted from Shamayim. We have a siyata dishmaya from above to fulfill all the mitzvot of the Torah. Now we can understand why HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us to hear the sound of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. The Torah tells us, Yom teruah yelachem. It shall be a day of shofar sounding for you. As the third of the 10 reasons why we have the mitzvah of shofar, Rav Saadia Gaon writes that the reason why we blow the shofar, it's intended to remind us of that revelation at Har Sinai, because the giving of the Torah also had the blowing of the shofar. V'kol shofar chazak meod. The sound of the shofar was very powerful. So the purpose of the mitzvah of hearing the shofar is to evoke the sound of shofar that was heard on Har Sinai. That's why we blow the shofar during the month of Elul and Rosh Hashanah, to evoke that sound that was on Har Sinai when we received the Torah and our ancestors declared Naaseh v'nishma. The Gemara Masechet Beitzah says, Kol mezonotav shel adam kesuvim lo merosh Hashanah ad Yom HaKippurim. All of a person's meals, all of his parnasah, all of his income are allotted to him from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. Therefore, if a person became submerged in the mundane, in the earthly matters during the past year, to the point that he can no longer hear Hashem's voice, two voices you cannot discern. So how dare can you approach God on Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur to request an ample livelihood for the upcoming year? I'm going to ask Hashem for parnasah when during my parnasah I'm not even thinking of God. I'm not hearing God's voice. I don't bless Hashem when I get my food or when I get my income. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu actually provides us with a solution. He gives us the way of success. He says, you want to know what it is? Blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Because when you blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, it will inspire you to do teshuvah, regretting the fact that we've neglected the sound of the shofar that was given on Matan Torah in the past. We'll accept from that moment forward to hear the sound of the shofar of Matan Torah, even when we're occupied in the earthly, mundane matters of Olam Hazeh. And that's why the Chachamim instituted the text of the blessing to be Lishmoa Kol Shofar, to hear the sound of the shofar. For that is the text of the bracha. They wanted to teach us the purpose of the mitzvah. The purpose of the mitzvah is to hear the sound of the shofar, not just the physical sound that's coming out of the shofar from the Baal Tokea, but to hear the sound of the Matan Torah, the shofar of Matan Torah that was blown so many millennia ago. That sound that grows stronger and stronger. Vahi kol hashofar holech behazek meod. That helps us realize that the institution of blowing the shofar, not just on Rosh Hashanah, but even prior to Rosh Hashanah, during the month of Elul, as we're going to begin next week, it's also meant for the same purpose. It's to arouse us to perform teshuvah, to make amends for the fact that we neglected to notice, to hear the sound of the shofar Matan Torah throughout the past year. So maybe this is the meaning, the deeper meaning of the opening pasuk in this week's parasha. Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom beracha uklala. See, I am giving you, in front of you today, a beracha uklala. All the matters that relate to Olam Hazeh, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us hayom, He gives us today, contain an element of beracha, and chas v'shalom, it can contain an element of kilala, of blessing and curse. Then the Torah explains, Et ha-beracha asher tishme'u el mitzvot Hashem Elokechem. Earthly matters can only contain beracha on the condition that you're able to hear. Asher tishme'u el mitzvot Hashem Elokechem. You can hear the voice of Matan Torah, the voice of Hashem, the mitzvot that came from Matan Torah. That same voice that said, Asher anochi mitzaveh etchem hayom, as if it was given today. And seeing that the mitzvot were given in the form of a promise, hearing the voice of Matan Torah ensures us that we're going to be able to observe the mitzvot without any interference of the Yetzer Hara. And as a result, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bestow upon us all forms of beracha and salvation. And on the other hand, has v'shalom ve'akelala, the curse, matters relating to olam hazeh can also be a curse. It can also be something that we don't want, detrimental to our lives. Im lo tishme'u el mitzvot Hashem Elokechem asher anochi mitzavetchem hayom. If you fail to hear that awe-inspiring voice of Hashem from Matan Torah that continues to grow stronger and stronger, even though it took place so many years ago, as a result of that failure, you will sink, chas v'shalom, into the mires of olam hazeh until you fail to appreciate and cherish any parts of the Torah. You're not going to be assisted from Shamayim. You're not going to be helped from HaKadosh Baruch Hu in your efforts to observe the mitzvot of Torah because you can't discern the voices. You're not paying attention whatsoever. All you care about is your clothing, your house, your car, your money, and it's all that matters to you. God doesn't matter to you. Mitzvot doesn't matter to you. So why should Hashem help? It turns out that all your money and everything that you worked so hard physically for, it just becomes a kilala. So we see, Rabotai, a very, very deep and intimate connection and relationship between the opening Pesukim of this week's Parashat Re'eh, and the month of Elul. Chachamim instituted the practice of blowing the shofar throughout the month of Elul in order to inspire us to perform teshuvah for having submerged ourselves in olam hazeh. And as a result, we fail to notice that powerful, inspiring voice of Hashem that emanated from Matan Torah. Therefore, it's incumbent upon all of us, starting right now, starting Hodesh Elul, to sanctify ourselves in all of our earthly pursuits and endeavors, doing everything L'Shem Shamayim. I work L'Shem Shamayim. I eat L'Shem Shamayim. I play sports L'Shem Shamayim. Everything I do has to be L'Shem Shamayim. In the notion of Bechol derachecha da'ehu, in all your ways, know God. That's what we're commanded. If we act this way, we will surely hear the sound of Matan Torah. We will merit the fulfillment of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's promise. Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom beracha. We will successfully prepare for our Hayom, for our Rosh Hashanah, to receive all the heavenly blessings, Tachel Shana Birchoteha, all the salvations until the coming of Mashiach. B'mena b'yamenu. Amen. Ken Yiratzon. Have a great, great